So if I can take one little detour here,
Yeah.
there's something I wanted to introduce, which a friend pointed this out in a conversation some weeks ago, and it has stuck with me. There is a scientific result that increasingly, I think, explains one of the weirdest features of this modern chaos, which is the tendency of the claims to be most overblown in places where they are least likely to be true, right? So Portland is the site of these riots over anti-Black racism. Portland is as liberal a city as exists in the country. Presumably, anti-Black racism is less prevalent here than it is almost anywhere else. Why is it happening? Yeah. Same thing with Evergreen. Why was Evergreen the site of this most incredible set of protests about white supremacy? Of all places for white supremacy to be difficult to find, you would imagine Evergreen would be top of the list. And, you know, for me to be their first target
demonstrates just how difficult it was to find.
Yeah, just how difficult it was to find. Yeah. So anyway, here's the question. Zach, could you put up the paper that I sent you? So what this paper describes is an experiment that tested what people's perception initially about color, having no connotation whatsoever, blue versus purple, people's perception of color as one color in the experiment became increasingly rare. So let me read the abstract to the extent I can do that from here.
Do you want me?
Yeah, you want to do it?
I can see it, yeah. Why do some social problems seem so intractable? In a series of experiments, we show that people often respond to decreases in the prevalence of a stimulus by expanding their concept of it. When blue dots became rare, participants began to see purple dots as blue. When threatening faces became rare, participants began to see neutral faces as threatening. And when unethical requests became rare, participants began to see innocuous requests as unethical. This prevalence-induced concept change occurred even when participants were forewarned about it, and even when they were instructed and paid to resist it. Social problems may seem intractable in part because reductions in their prevalence lead people to see more of them. Wow. So this is like with the Noam Chomsky interview in the New Yorker. I've not seen this before, so I've not read the paper. I can't say what's in it, or this was published, you said 2018?
Yeah.
Or maybe you said that to me off air. So there's probably been time for rebuttal, if there has been time for rebuttal, and I don't know if there has been.
I looked. I do not find
see it?
A rebuttal.
Amazing.
It's amazing. So if we can just put this in context, you and I immediately spot in that abstract a claim that, if true, has tremendous implications for things like claims of injustice. In effect, what we've got is a kind of built-in, apparently neurological relativism that as something becomes rare, finds it where it isn't. Now, you can imagine that there are all kinds of reasons that your neurobiology would have such a feature, right? Imagine
neurological relativism.
You're searching for berries, right? The berries you will find first are going to be the ones that are obvious and right in front of your face. As those get depleted because you've picked all the good ones, you have to become increasingly sensitive. So diminishing returns causes your perception to need to get more sensitive. You need to effectively become visually berry paranoid in order to spot the one that's halfway hidden by the leaf. I know. Yeah, that's an incredible phrase, isn't it? But
visually berry paranoid.
Visually berry paranoid. Yes.
Nice.
But okay, so you can imagine that this could result in you collecting more berries per hour, a kind of increase in your sensitivity. The problem
or it's, you've hit that point in the diminishing returns curve where you should go fish instead, or go to a totally different part of the of your locale to find berries.
But imagine how that would play out if you were looking for berries, right? Your sensitivity goes up, which means you keep finding the ones that are harder and harder to find. And then eventually you're seeing phantom berries where they aren't. You're just seeing a shadow or a dark space in the thing, and you're reaching in and you're getting nailed by a thorn, right? The point is that calculation will hit you too. And it'll be like, I keep thinking I'm going to get something and there's no reward. I keep thinking I'm going to get it, no reward, right?
But there's physical feedback with regard to visually berry paranoia.
Right.
And there's not inherently any actual physical feedback when it's claims that are entirely socially constructed around, I am sure that he said that to me because he's racist.
Right. So what you've got is a system that has I think an objective analysis would tell you that there was a great deal of racism at the founding of the country. Even people who wanted to know better still didn't, right? And that the degree to which racism is a commonly encountered phenomenon has dropped dramatically. And that at this point in history, we are, in objective terms, far better off than we were with respect to this thing that we all agree is bad. However,
And not only that, but better than most of the world.
Better than most of the world, and we all know what the goal
Or
is,
we
which
were
is
20
zero
years ago.
racism, right? So that's an amazing degree of progress. But the point is, what it accompanies is a decrease in actual examples of racism that you encounter, which, if this paper is right and general, which it suggests it seems to be by virtue of the fact that they weren't just looking at colors, they were looking at things like perceptions of threat and perceptions of injustice.
Yeah.
That what this suggests is that as the phenomenon in question becomes increasingly rare, people will find it where it isn't.
Yeah.
Which raises rather directly the specter that microaggressions and every analog of them is going to be formulated as you approach zero with respect to this being a common phenomenon, right? And so what will that look like? Well, it will certainly, in a case where, let's say there was zero racism in policing, and I'm not saying that there is, but let's say that we reached zero, right? There would still be bad shootings and things, because to have people enforcing the law with guns guarantees there will be a certain number of bad shootings.
We'll hit something close to zero racism in policing before we will hit zero errors in violence in policing.
Right. And then what you would predict is that people will read into events that actually weren't bad shootings, or events that were bad shootings but were not racially biased.
Exactly.
They will read into it exactly this thing. And that, of course, could derange civilization, especially if you had an online amplification mechanism for these things. So, think about the term white supremacy, right? White supremacy was a thing that everybody would have agreed was vanishingly rare 15 years ago, because we all understood it to be something pretty dramatic, right? It wasn't just garden variety racism. It was an aggressive belief structure that, crosses burning on lawns and this kind of thing.
And gosh, I want to say every, but let's just say nearly every elected official in the United States would have been proud to get up and say, obviously, I oppose white supremacism. Obviously.
Right. It's the most obvious thing in the world. And now we're getting to the point where the absence of overt white supremacy, right, the relegating of that ugly, terrible phenomenon to a tiny number of people on a fringe that doesn't matter, right? That thing is now being read into all kinds of stuff, right? Structural racism and your failure to say anything about it is the equivalent of white supremacy, which is insane, right? So I would argue, first of all, we need to take the terms back. White supremacy, I would argue that there is a floor, a natural floor, based on the common parlance interpretation of the words. That a white supremacist should, by definition, at the very least, have to be rooting for white people to rule over others. They would have to be rooting for white people to win, right? And that means that it can't be a feature of a structure, right? It can't be a feature. If you are somebody who doesn't want to see one race win over other races, then that, to me, suggests you can't be a white supremacist. It doesn't mean you can't be ignorant. It doesn't mean that you can't be part of the problem, right? You could be ignoring important patterns, but that term would seem to suggest a desire to see something rather than just an indifference to it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to be explored here. One of my concerns with what you just said, though, is that there is widespread conflation between individuals and populations, right? That most people actually don't understand when they have jumped that giant gap between talking about an individual versus talking about a population. And while that I find egregious, and really we should be educating people much, much better such that people understand the distinction between an individual and a population level analysis and level of responsibility, what is less surprising to me is that well, maybe actually more surprising in some ways, is that scientists themselves contribute to this confusion. And I actually don't think I'm going to go here now. I think I don't quite agree with your saying we need the terms back, because I think I have been interested in getting, for instance, the term feminism back for a long time, and I sort of gave up. I've been long before we were ever on any sort of national stage, I was calling what has been passing for feminism since the mid-90s faux feminism, FAUX feminism. And, with Kendi on the stage taking so much, collecting so many resources and having so much power, I just don't know if it's possible to take these terms back. And the distinction, I guess, and this is what I was going to say, that if an individual can be a white supremacist, does it necessarily follow that an organization cannot be? I don't think it necessarily follows, but I do think that it is absolutely necessary to, whenever you're making that leap from a category that applies to individuals and you are now applying it to structures, to systems, to populations, to organizations, to be clear that that is what you are doing and that it therefore may not hold, that this therefore may be an illegitimate move, because evolutionary processes don't work in the same way between individuals and populations.
Well, okay, a couple things. One, let me clarify. It's not, obviously I don't want to take the term white supremacy back. I don't want it. Right. What I want
that's not what you were saying.
Right. I want to corral the term to a reasonable standard. And the important thing that we are seeing, I think, we are seeing it overtake quality thought across the board, is a demotion of intent as relevant to the assessment of the presence of a thought pattern. And so, for Chomsky to say that Trump is the greatest criminal in human history, and for his explanation to be that he doesn't care about intent, the point is the hazard, right? This is garbage thinking.